Okay, I wanted to quickly address something related to the limited waivers that could be coming down from the Department of Education. We don't know what they are yet, but yet I've seen a bunch of articles floating around the net from, Huffington Post, New York Times, um, the Mighty, things of that nature, using language like could and might. Uh, those aren't definitive, and they're intended to incite. And so let's go ahead and just sort of walk through how these limited waivers work, because this isn't the first time this has happened. This happened back in 2009 and 2010 when Arne Duncan was Secretary of Education under the Obama administration as a result of the financial meltdown that we had in 2008. Okay, so this isn't anything new. This is going to be a little bit different, but let me explain to you how these waivers come down, okay? And so that people can focus their energy. If you want to try to preempt it, great, do it. I mean, I'm watching everything that's going on, but I understand there's a lot of you out there that want to try to stay ahead of this. But this is what I want to explain. Is it the federal government that just by itself makes these decisions on what waivers and waves this magic wand as to who gets a waiver and who doesn't get a waiver and what kind of waivers are needed? No, guys. All of these waivers are going to vary state to state and is going to depend entirely upon what your particular State Department of Education requests and asks for with regards to the waiver and whether or not they will be granted a waiver. All right, so if you do a Google search, a simple Google search of 2009 or 2010 maintenance of effort waivers, Department of Education, you can even have it broken down by state, and you will see that it was the individual states that made the request of the Secretary of Education. At the time was Arne Duncan. Arne Duncan just didn't wake up one day and go, you know what, I'm going to grant a waiver to Alabama just because I like Alabama, or I'm going to sit there and ignore their request because it's Oregon. You see, that's not how it's operated. The majority of it's sort of like this. You got to understand the concept of IDEA in the first place. It's a civil rights act that comes with a little bit of funding. And that funding it comes from the federal government, but that funding from the federal government is meant to supplement state funding and local funding because of a history of inequitable treatment of our special populations. It is the institution of public education in each one of our states and each one of our community that gave rise to the need to have the IDEA and to have 504, because they haven't had a very good track record over the past 100 years of how it served our special populations. They still have a problem with it. Thus is the reason you have due process rights and mediation rights and state complaint rights and things of that nature. That's the reason why you're invested as a watchdog over your child's and given an equal say with regards to your child's educational planning. It isn't because somebody's altruistic in the government. That's not the reason. It's because of historical abuses that gave rise to the need for this Civil Rights Act. That's it. And then they kick down some funding to supplement what the local schools and the state government need to spend equally across the board. And then the special education funding from the feds go on top of that. And that's where it's equitable. Okay? But unfortunately, and there's a warning in there that they can't supplant. And supplant means replace. So they can't sit there and go, well, we got some funding from the federal government, and so therefore we're going to spend more money over here on football. And then we're going to use that special education funding not only to help kick some back to our football coaches and make them glorified aides, using special education funding to do that, because that happens a lot, guys. But we're just going to supplant We're going to replace what we should be spending with what we're getting from the feds. That's just not how this works. So if you understand that that's the concept of how the funding mechanism works, now you're going to understand where the limited waivers are going to come from. They're not going to come from DeVos. I don't care how many Huffington Post articles or New York Times or the Mighty, because this isn't about DeVos, guys. I could care less. Quite frankly, have I seen a difference between DeVos and Arne Duncan? No, I haven't. Why? Because if you understood the structure of American public education, you would understand that it's a bottom-up system. It's not a top-down structure. There's top-down requirements. A state sort of is caught in the middle, managing compliance that the feds are asking, and then also managing the local governments. But the local public schools, guys, by and large, are independent corporate entities, a separate governmental entity, even from the state. That is our bottom-up structure on public education. So this whole thing of, DeVos is horrible. DeVos is horrible. She's a figurehead with very little power, quite frankly. So everybody freaking out about DeVos and writing articles about DeVos as though DeVos is going to have anything to do with these waivers. She will, but these waivers are going to come from your state departments of education. Now, will they scapegoat DeVos? More than likely. They don't want to be the bad guy saying that we're asking for everything in the kitchen sink with regards to the waiver because this COVID thing, this shutdown was just too hard for us. We couldn't think outside the box. We don't know how to not be archaic in our delivery of education to students. Some of our kids are just too complicated and we can't think through the problem. So what are we going to do? We're going to ask for a waiver. The waivers are going to come from your administrative heads, starting with your special education directors to the State Department of Education to the superintendents. They're all going to make requests on what they think these waivers should look like for your state. It is going to be your state superintendent that submits these waivers. That's where it's coming from. So if you want to sit there and direct your attention to where it needs to go, to sit there and try to head off disaster, what you might think is disaster, we don't know yet. So why speculate? Why fear? But you can send a message to your State Department of Education that you guys are watching and that you won't tolerate it. Okay? There will be waivers, and some limited waivers I agree with. Some of these procedural things, that have little to no substantive impact on your child and their ability to receive a free and appropriate public education. Yeah, I don't have a problem with limited waivers in those areas. Not at all. But I'm going to have a huge problem if you think that you're going to start there diluting what a free and appropriate public education looks like. I'm really going to complain if they sit there and they go, well, parents shouldn't be able to file a due process complaint during this time. I don't agree with that. But I'll be the first one to sit there and let you know. And I'll be the first one to sit there and stand in line and complain with you. Maybe lead a revolution. Who knows? Who knows what's going to be needed? But be careful in what you read out there, because you got to sort of understand the structure of education in this country to understand where these requests are coming from. And they're not. DeVos isn't waking up at night. She's not brushing her teeth with a little to-do list next to her, sitting there going, how do I screw over special needs kids? That's just not how this works. If our special populations get screwed over, it's because of your individual states. That's where it's going to come from.